Hey everybody, it's Alex, and today we are inside our Model 3 again. I've had a lot of questions about the Model 3 infotainment system and what I think about it versus some of the competition. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the infotainment system. First, we're going to be looking at this, which is my infotainment system in the Standard Range Plus model. Then we're going to be taking a look at the infotainment system in a fully loaded Model 3 Performance. The first thing to know about the Model 3 is that we don't have a separate instrument cluster and separate infotainment system. Instead, we have just one screen right here in the middle of the car. Some folks have been asking me this week if I think that this is particularly awkward versus having a car with an instrument cluster behind the steering wheel. Now, having a separate screen behind the steering wheel is my preference just because I like that particular look, but I don't find this layout particularly unergonomic or anything along those lines. I do have to say that I wish Tesla would give us a heads-up display, but in the absence of that, I don't have a particular problem glancing right over here to the right of the steering wheel for my speed, etc., because you're not doing this that often. My bigger ergonomic complaint with this screen and infotainment system isn't the screen itself, it's just that Tesla's put so many features and functions in here that we would normally find on separate buttons. Admittedly, most of these functions are accessed infrequently, so for instance, I never have any vehicle that I own in any other mode than auto for the exterior lights. So not having a separate button or knob for that, I'm totally fine with that. Same with the fog lamps right there. Mirrors, I'm probably okay with not having a separate mirror button, but I do wish the steering wheel was a little bit more easily adjustable. Personally, I find myself using that a little bit more often. Of all of the controls that are just here in the infotainment screen, the windshield wiper one is the more unusual one for me because we do have that option of auto or the various different intervals right there. And I do wish that that was a separate stock on the steering wheel or somewhere else on the vehicle. Aside from that, I'm pretty okay with the level of button minimalism in this vehicle. I do love a lot of buttons. I just bought a vehicle with a ton of buttons in the center console, but strange enough, I'm also okay with the button minimalization here. Taking a closer look at the left side of the screen, you'll notice that we have the little car icon right there. That would change if I put the vehicle into drive. So if I put the car into drive, you'll notice we then get the parking sensor readouts right there. If I put the car in reverse, we get the backup camera over there on the right. If I press park, then it goes back to the display where we can open the charge door right there. We can open the trunk, open the frunk. Now, it would be handy, I think, if the frunk had some other way of opening it other than this button. On the trunk, there is a button on the outside that you can use. On the frunk, there is not. Down here at the bottom, we have a screen that swipes across. This gives us our trip computer information. So for instance, we can see our total power consumption right there. If I swipe the other way, this would give us our tire pressure readout after we've been driving for a while. We also have some quick accesses to the backup camera right over there. Our energy screen right there where we can adjust the charge rate, scheduled charging, information on our last supercharger, and we can set the charge limit. So you can set it all the way down there or up here if you want to. Remember that always charging your battery to 100% is going to reduce your overall battery life. But if you want the maximum range in your vehicle, that's where you would want to set it. We have a voice command button right over here as well. At the bottom of the screen, the car icon takes us over to the quick controls for the vehicle. This car has the basic autopilot system. We're going to see the autopilot screen in the performance version. That model has the full self-driving upgrade, so you'll notice it has some different options there. So for instance, here we just have the forward collision warning system right there. Lane departure warning, blind spot monitoring, automatic emergency braking. Up here we have the cruise follow distance auto steering, since this does have the basic autopilot system, speed limit warning, etc. Under safety and security is where we would enable and disable Sentry mode. You can also do that over the app. You can also turn on and off the cabin overheat protection if you're interested in that particular feature. Infotainment is handled via this little music icon right there. We can pull this up. You see we have radio and phone on this car because we do have the basic software package here. This is one of the differences between the Standard Range Plus and the next models up in the lineup. We have our streaming media interface where we can play things right off of our smartphone right like that. Easy access to our audio settings right there for tone, balance, and the options. You'll see we do have the immersive sound option in this particular car. And then we have just FM radio. There is no AM radio antenna. There is no XM radio function in this system either. So if you are dedicated to your XM radio, you may want to look at a different vehicle. Also missing in this system, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, or any of that sort of smartphone integration. We also don't have any way of navigating your smartphone's media library in this system. I think that is a little bit of a pity because if we wanted to browse our media library on our particular smartphone, so if I wanted to, for instance, go over here and play our Canadian Brass playlist, I would have to do that over here on the smartphone itself. and then it would begin streaming through the car's infotainment system. I can track forward and track backward, but I cannot pull up a list of playlists or songs right there on the screen. If I click up this button right here, we have some additional features. For instance, we have the call button right there. We can see our recent calls. We can see charging right there, that same screen that we saw earlier. The camera screen shortcut, energy shortcut, consumption for right here for the last 30 miles, 15 miles, 5 miles, instant range, average range, etc. We then have our trip right there. This would give us consumption estimates based on a trip that we had programmed into the system. I'll show you that in just a second. And then we have a calendar option right there that will pull calendar items from your connected device very easily into the system. It's a very handy feature. Now let's talk about how we navigate. You'll notice that on the screen we have this Google Map. It is very, very snappy. This is definitely one of the speediest infotainment systems available, regardless of whether you're looking at an EV or not. Really, no one else has this kind of really snappy touchscreen interface. All this mapping data is provided by Google. And if you choose the up-level vehicles, then we get satellite imagery. In this particular model, we don't have that. If I click the search button, we can enter an address or we can enter a destination, and it will try and find that in its online database. So for instance, if I just wanted to enter the name of a restaurant, so for instance, Scott's Seafood right there. You saw how snappy that was as far as the route calculation goes, and the system is going to take into account traffic in this routing, even though it's not going to show the traffic right here on the screen because we don't have that upgraded infotainment system that we find in the more expensive models. It's also going to give us range estimates based on that location, the speeds involved, elevation changes, etc. This is one area where Tesla really excels, is in the range calculations for the car. Now if I go back over to, the energy screen, hit the wrong option there, you'll see that on the trip screen we now see a projected consumption figure. So we're at 67% now. We'll end up at 51% by the time we get there according to the car. This is one of the most accurate trip meters that we see out there. The system takes into account terrain in its calculations. So for instance, if we're going up and over a mountain pass like that, and then I went back to that energy screen, you'll notice we have that deep dive right there because we're going up and over a 2,200 foot mountain pass. This is again one of the big differences between this and other EVs out there, is that this does take that data into account. Now this is not live gathering customers' data together and giving you real-time readouts based on anonymized other Teslas out there. But Tesla is using real information from other vehicles that have driven on similar routes, etc., and they're computing that expected consumption. Exactly what that data set looks like, we don't exactly know, but again, they're not using live anonymized data or anything like that, but these are based on real-world examples, we're told, and that's why this range estimate is so accurate. Continuing down along the bottom, we have direct access functions to the 2 heated seats up front. This is a little bit different if you have the rear heated seat option. This option right here pulls up our climate control. We would adjust the vents using these sliders on screen. You can separate these out, direct them together, and have them up and down right like that. Same over there on the passenger side if you want it up and down. Personally, I wish I had air vents that I could adjust a little bit more manually. This isn't quite to my liking right there. And then over here we have the buttons for the front defroster and then the rear defroster as well. On the far right, we have a speaker icon we can then use to increase or decrease the volume, mute it right there like that. Up at the very top of the screen, we have a button to lock or unlock the doors in the vehicle. We have our clock, temperature outside, the T button brings up this screen about your Tesla. We can also pull up the owner's manual right there. And then if we pull down, this is where we can access those little Easter eggs that are so well known in the Tesla system. The easy entry option up here changes to our various memory modes right here. So we have different people in their Valley mode, easy entry, etc. You can rename those, you can add different drivers. The Valley mode's very easy to use. To the right of that, we have a Wi-Fi icon, and that's where we choose to join a Wi-Fi network. And then our Bluetooth interface there for the various smartphones that are connected with the car. There's finally a passenger airbag on-off button over there. And then the different looks to the map, north up, direction up, guidance, etc. As far as interacting with the infotainment system, this is quite simply, again, one of the best systems to interact with as far as navigation and destinations. I found this super, super easy to use, and you can enter in addresses and destinations while you're in motion. Some people think that that's a horrible thing to do, but honestly, this system is so easy to use, I didn't really find it too much of a problem. Some folks will still be a little bit offended by entering destinations while you're in motion, But personally, I would rather have that option because your passenger can always enter destinations for you. And systems that lock everything out don't allow the passenger to enter those destinations for you. Now let's hop into a performance model. In the performance model, the screen is the same, but the software is a little bit different. This has the more advanced software package with satellite imagery. Both systems use the Google mapping interface, so if I change the look over here to not use the satellite imagery, you'll see this is very much like what we find in the base model, except that we have traffic information displayed on this screen. This is one of the big differences between the base model and the upper end trims. As we see in the other model, the response is very snappy. This is definitely one of the easiest nav systems to use, and you'll really notice that the speed of entry here is very easy. So for instance, if we were to pull up a drive right there, it's snappier than other systems out there. Now, it will still take time to find all those superchargers for your trip. That's what it's busy doing there, but the actual routing function is very, very quick. As you can see, the system has now charted a course across the United States using all those supercharger stations. It thinks it's going to take us quite some time to get there, 42 hours. We're going to have all these supercharging stops right along there, and you can navigate on autopilot as well. One of the big things you'll notice is, of course, the supercharging network that allows us to move across the middle of the US very effectively. As I've said in other reviews before, the real thing about the supercharger network to keep in mind is not the number of stations, because in the Bay Area, especially in most of California actually, there are far more SAE fast charge stations or CHAdeMO fast charge stations than supercharger stations, whether we're talking about locations, plugs, whatever. But as you cross the country, you will certainly not find very many of those stations out here in Wyoming or rural Nebraska. On the left side of the screen, not too much has changed. We still have the controls for the frunk, the trunk, the charging door right there. Moving on over to the media interface, you'll notice that we have the streaming option. We don't have that in the base model. If we click over to radio, you'll see that we just have FM. There is still no satellite radio even in the top end trim. And if we move over to our phone interface, move over to one of these phones here, you'll notice that we still can't browse our Bluetooth media library via this interface. At the bottom of the screen, we still have the shortcut buttons for the heated front seats. You'll find those in the base model as well. But if I click over here to the climate control interface, you'll notice we have another screen. This is how we turn on and off the rear heated seats. This really strikes me as an odd function because the rear seats don't have their own buttons. So if you want to swipe through those modes, you have to have the front passenger or the driver do that for you. To make things a little bit easier, there is an all-off button. So if you had these seats set to different heat levels along those lines and you suddenly decide nobody wants their seat heated, you just press the one button and they'll all turn off. Setting vehicle settings is basically the same. We do have expanded options in the autopilot menu because we do have autopilot in this vehicle, so you'll see that we do have the ability to customize navigation on autopilot. You can set speed-based lane changes, disabled, mild, average, mad max, etc. You can require lane change confirmation, or you can just let the car try and do it all on its own. Aside from that, when we hop over to the consumption screens, you'll notice that we definitely have lower overall efficiency than the base model because of the extra weight that we have carrying around that larger battery pack and, of course, the summer tires. When it comes to my overall take on this infotainment system, I have to admit that I'm a little bit torn. I do wish that we had Apple CarPlay or Android Auto integration here to browse your media library, or at the very least Waze integration. I think Waze integration would really be a nice touch to this Google Map interface. I also wish that we had some more of these functions in dedicated buttons rather than touch screens here. The heated rear seats being operated through this touchscreen seems a little bit silly to me. But overall, I have to say that the speed in which this system operates is just so much better than the systems out there. For instance, if I just want to go to this restaurant here, that's a really quick and simple step. And there really is no competitive screen out there that has this kind of performance to it. The modern BMW screens, the modern Audi screens, even in the A8, the Volvo screens, etc., none of them is quite this snappy. Oddly enough, I think the only other systems out there that are this responsive in general terms would actually be FCA's Uconnect system that we find in Chrysler, Ram, Dodge, etc. vehicles. But of course, that's not going to have the same kind of functionality or look anywhere as snazzy as this system. It just responds as quickly to your touch.